speed. She was my senior assistant in American History and World History 2 this year. And in a minute, she will deliver her oral to us, and then she'll have a seat, and we'll sit down and have some conversation about her topic. Will you pray with me? Dear God, I thank you so much for the year that I've had with Leah, and I thank you for her heart for this message, and I pray that you'll be with her as she delivers it, that her passion for this will come through, and that you'll help her to remember what she has worked so hard to say. And we pray all this in Jesus' name.
New York City, New York, September 11th, 2001, 9:03 a.m. A passenger plane, Flight 175, crashes into the south side of the World Trade Center between the 77th and 85th floors. Dazed, confused, and terrified, the civilians inside begin to run down the stairwells in droves. Many were not so lucky. Having been too close to the impact, they were trapped, injured, or already dead. Among the panicking masses, there was one man who was seen running up the stairs. Witnesses report he was wearing a red bandana over his mouth and nose. This man ran into the collapsing offices to coordinate the escape of survivors. He commanded the moving of debris, the extinguishing of smaller fires, and he even carried a woman down the stairwell to the sky lobby. After having moved a second set of survivors down the stairs, he returned to the 78th floor. And by then, it was 9:59 a.m. The South Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed upon itself due to the severe heat of the fires melting its steel supports. And though this man went down with the tower, he was forever remembered by those he saved as the man in the red bandana. Was he born brave? Was he possessed by some higher power? Or was he just in the wrong place at the wrong time? All who heard his story agreed that he was a hero. But what does that mean? I have spent my entire life surrounded by heroes. My father has been in law enforcement longer than I've been alive. My grandfather has spent most all of his professional career in law enforcement. My uncle served 2 tours with the Army in Iraq during Operation Enduring Freedom. 3 of my great-grandfathers served in the Navy and Army during World War II, and many others in my extended family have served during Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, and various other conflicts and operations. Needless to say, I have spent my entire life listening to stories of bravery in the face of danger, character in times of uncertainty, and humor in difficult situations. Having looked up to these examples of sacrifice and bravery, I recently found myself wanting to follow in the footsteps of my father and grandfather. It was then that I began to question what exactly a hero was and why they behaved the way that they did. So heroes, they make frequent appearances in our society, especially in the entertainment industry. So, after that lighthearted note, we are going to play a little game. I want you to finish the lyric that I start, okay? I'm holding out for a hero. From 0 to hero. There goes my hero. He was a jukebox. Hero. We could be heroes. This ain't no place for no hero. So this is not a phenomena just unique to songs, right? In books, movies, video games, and even in commercials, we find very heavy themes of heroism. Now, we get the sense from looking at this that heroes are integral to our society. But the problem with these ideals being so deeply saturated in our culture is that the definition of what a hero is often gets lost in the fray. So in order to find the foundation, we must first understand our personal perceptions. So on average, a person can name 5 people they believe to be heroes. So get your list started now. In an experiment conducted by 2 social scientists, it was found that 1/3 of the answers given were family members or close friends. Another 1/3 were fictional characters. And the last 1/3 were non-related, non-fictional people. But through all of these various answers, some common traits emerged. I'm going to write over here. So they had the courage to stand up and do what needed to be done. They had the selflessness, that's a long word, the selflessness to lay down their interests for the interest of others. And they had the competency to do both. Competent. I know how to spell. That's good enough. Okay, but possessing these first 3 traits doesn't automatically make one a hero while having them is noble, right? So when it comes to heroism, kinetic energy outweighs potential. Action is fundamentally required on the part of the individual. So we need action. And that being said, a hero must also be somebody who possesses moral courage instead of just having physical courage. Basically, the morality to distinguish between right and wrong and what needs to be fought for. Keep those in mind. Okay. So these last 2 right here are what distinguish our heroes from our role models. Okay? Your role models might be good people, and they might make positive impacts, but their impacts don't always come from a place of morality or moral courage. Having both is good and enriching for our lives, but keeping them separate is crucial to understanding the definition of what a hero truly is. Now that we've defined the 5 heroic traits, courage, selflessness, competency, action, and morality, we must now examine how a hero comes to be. Now, doing my research in this topic, I found that there are 2 basic types of heroes: career heroes and fell-out-of-the-sky heroes. So career heroes are people whose job put them in situations in which they must display these 5 traits. So these are people like police officers, firefighters, paramedics, nurses, and soldiers. Fell-out-of-the-sky heroes are those that you hear about on the news. They are ordinary, everyday men and women who find themselves in situations in which they must act. These types of heroes will emerge from situations like mass shootings, natural disasters, and medical emergencies. But regardless of their background, previous training, or the nature of the situation, there is one thing that ties these 2 different types of heroes together. Tragedy begets heroism. In a perfect world, we would have no need of heroes. We would not need anybody to come and save the day. But because we live in our fallen nature and in this fallen world, the worst of humanity brings forth the best. But why? What would make anybody think in their right mind to run into the face of danger when they should be running away? Well, for career heroes, this is an easy answer. As I found with my interview with Gary Kennedy, founder of Heart, Healing Emotions Above Reason and Thoughts, we talked about how career heroes are trained to deal with dangerous situations. You are told what it is you are to do and when you are to do it. Your mind is rewired and reprogrammed through your training to run into the face of danger instead of telling you to run away from it. In fact, this rewiring is so potent that this state of stress and adrenaline can almost become a natural state for you. Now, fell-out-of-the-sky heroes, that's a bit more complicated. So heroism is a total subversion of our basest human instinct, self-preservation. Your brain's ultimate purpose is to keep your body alive and functioning as best as it possibly can, thus your fight-or-flight response. It is nearly impossible to overcome this instinct without the proper training, but it has been done, and it is done every single day. How? Well, I personally believe that this begins with a high value of life. You must love life in order to lay your own to the side and risk losing it. But how can one come to value life so much as to throw theirs into the fire? There are 2 basic things. There are many, many reasons, but 2 basic reasons I came up with. They can come from things called trigger events. So trigger events are events that put the individual or the life of a loved one of the individual at stake. So car crashes, natural disasters, sudden medical emergencies, things such as that. But they make the individual come to realize how much they do value life and rethink how they're going to go going forward. Another reason that one can come to love life, and albeit the strongest, is the recognition that every single person is made in the image of God and possesses a soul and is loved by Him. No matter how this love of life comes about, it trickles into the other traits that make a character, into the other characteristics that make a hero. So, having gone over that, society is not wanting for examples of heroism. We often point to the heroes of the Marvel and DC universes because heroism is their full-time job. And not to mention, they have really cool superpowers that let them save the day in ways that you and I can't. Or we can point to the heroes of America's history, such as George Washington, Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King, and the like. Having this many heroes is a blessing. Anywhere we turn, we can look to for guidance. And I think one of the greatest examples of these 5 traits is found in Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. At MCA, you read Tale of Two Cities in advanced literature as a senior. The character in question is a solicitor by the name of Sidney Carton. Now, Carton is an interesting case because he does not start off as a heroic character. In fact, when we first meet him, he's falling down drunk and he's doing the work of other men. The reason he gives for this is that he does not think highly enough of himself to go out and make a name on his own. Throughout the story, we see small glimmers of the true character of Carton, but it isn't until the very end that we see him become the hero of the narrative. Another character, Charles Darnay, is up for wrongful execution at the hands of French revolutionaries because of his familial ties to a certain French official. Carton realizes that he must save Darnay's life for the sake of his wife and child. Now, earlier in the story, we are told that Carton and Darnay look nearly identical to the untrained eye. Upon this, Carton hinges a plan to get into Darnay's cell and change places with him. Carton proceeds to masterfully execute a plan using diversions, bribes, and sedatives until he himself goes to the guillotine while Darnay is whisked away to safety in England. Carton followed the example of Christ to the very letter, taking the place of another man to die a criminal's death, all for the love that he held for him and his family. Now, fictional heroes are great, but non-fictional heroes are far more important to our lives, as the impacts they have made have been upon this world and not in some fictional world out there. One such hero of this caliber is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. We learn of Dietrich Bonhoeffer in World History II during the Holocaust unit. Mr. Bonhoeffer was a German pastor during the rise of Hitler's Third Reich. Now, having started off as a pacifist, Bonhoeffer quickly realized that simply speaking the moral truth was not going to save the lives of the German Jews. Bonhoeffer decided to sign on with the German Secret Service as a double agent. And while he was pretending to be gathering information for the government, he really was going out and saving the lives of Jews left in the wake of the Third Reich. Bonhoeffer was aware of several assassination plots against Hitler's life and was even a part of one. But unfortunately, in 1943, Bonhoeffer was caught after an unsuccessful assassination attempt on Hitler's life. He was then imprisoned for the next 2 years, the time in which he wrote some of his most famous works. In 1945, Bonhoeffer was hanged alongside 6 other resistance members. One man who was present at the execution was quoted as saying, "I was deeply moved by the way this lovable man prayed, so devout and so certain that God heard his prayer." Now, Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Sidney Carton each exemplify the qualities of heroes. They needed the courage to realize what they needed to do and to stand up for it. They needed the selflessness to lay down their own lives for the lives of others. They needed the competency to carry out their plans and keep their operations running. They needed the morality in their actions to realize what was right and what they needed to fight for. But there is another theme that pops up in these men's stories: sacrifice. Now, Bonhoeffer and Carton both lost their lives in their ventures. Heroes do not always lose their lives, but the sacrifices they make are still often monumental and life-changing. And yet another theme is brought up in these men's stories. Heroes are not always well known. In fact, the number of unknown heroes greatly outweighs the number of heroes that we know and celebrate today. But a hero is still a hero, even if their actions and names are known only to God. Now, this is all fine and good, but where did heroism originate? Why and when did heroism develop, and what is its ultimate goal? I believe the answer for this can be found in the Gospel of John, chapter 15, verse 13. "For greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends." Christ tells us this after commanding us to love one another as he first loved us. Christ's sacrifice on the cross was the greatest act of love that was ever committed on this earth. Jesus laid down his life in order to save every single one of us going forward into the future and going back into the past from the finality of sin and death. Jesus then was made the greatest hero that mankind had ever had the grace to receive. Heroism was born out of the love and the example of Christ. Heroism is the greatest act of love. Now, this does not mean that one has to be a Christian to be a hero. In fact, there are many stories of people who are different or no faith at all, acting in heroic ways. But faith is a major help in a bad situation. It is more comforting to know that you have a place in eternity when running into a situation in which you might not make it out. Death cannot stand in your way if you do not fear it. And if you place your love and trust in the man who first placed his love in you, you too can be capable of things that you never imagined. In the wreckage of the South Tower, the body of a man with a red bandana over his mouth and nose was found. Around him lay the bodies of firefighters, and in between them, a Jaws of Life tool. They had been carrying the tool up to the 78th floor to cut debris away from survivors at the time of the tower's collapse. Stories of the man of the red bandana got back to Allison Crowther, and she knew that her son always carried a red bandana in his back pocket. With pictures provided by Allison, the body was identified as Wells Remy Crowther, her oldest and only son. Jefferson Crowther, Wells' father, was quoted as saying his last hour was his legacy. Wells exemplified every single one of the heroic traits in every single action that he took that day. Did Wells know that he was going to die? We'll never know. But what we do know is that he followed the example of Christ to the very letter. He sacrificed it all for people he'd never even met, people who did not know his name, all because he believed they deserved another day. Would you?
Good job, Leah.
Trying to drink. Hold on. Okay.
So tell us what your plans are for the future.
Well, plans, she's not here.
Yeah.
Hopefully, they will work out, and I'm going to go to Midland College for first 2 years, because getting out of college debt-free is awesome. So we're going to work on that, and then I hope to transfer to ASU. I would like to major in chemistry. And from that point, hopefully, I will be able to go to the Texas Department of Public Safety's trooper school and become a state trooper.
Is there a way that you someday plan to work chemistry into your law enforcement career?
So
or
I do
is
actually.
That just a coincidence?
I get that question a lot. This was actually an idea that came from my father, so thanks, Dad. But basically, you get a backup degree because, you could get hurt at any moment, right? So if you go for a backup degree and you get hurt, you have a degree, you can go get a job, you don't have to go back to school. So the hope is with the chemistry degree, if I get hurt, I can go into the DPS crime lab and work forensics from there and still stay in the department.
Okay. So, you pretty clearly state in your paper that this is kind of a legacy of your family.
It is.
But is there a deeper motivation?
A deeper motivation.
A deeper reason that you want to do this?
That's very interesting. I have talked to a lot of people who have been trying to dissuade me from doing what I would like to do.
That's not what I'm doing.
No.
I'm just
well, thank you. But no, they always ask me that question, why in your right mind would you ever want to do this? And the answer that I always give is that, I have the ability, I have the know-how, and I have the want to. And so, if not me, then who, basically? If I have all of those qualities, I can do it, and I want to do it. I want to go out there and do that. And also, it's one of those things that you kind of feel in your gut, and you just can't shake it no matter what you do. And I think that's the thing called God, which I've been told a couple of times. So, I feel it's just a calling that I've been given.
And do you talked about maybe the ultimate reason that people do this is for love, and they see the value in life. So do those things have they played a role in your decision?
I think so, yeah. because, yeah, just kind of watching my dad and my grandfather, and I mean, hearing stories of my uncle going out and doing things, and just, I mean, I think I did ask them a couple of times when I was younger, hey, why do you go out and do this? Because I did mention in my paper, I just kind of learned from a young age that, you know, it's a possibility dad's not coming home today, you know? It was just kind of a part of life. And I didn't really question it. But then I did start to question. I'm like, why? And most of the answer was just to go out there and protect people who can't protect themselves. And that's always something that's, like, really resonated with me. So, I think so. Yeah. I don't know if that fully answers your question.
No, it does. It's good. Thank you.
So
you talked about it being important to, like, distinguish a role model from a hero. Mm-hmm. Why is that important?
Okay. The book that I read was not as strong on this point as I was, but I did kind of form a strong point on this. I mean, there are people who are like, oh, this person's my hero. You know, that's just kind of a default. But I think hero is kind of a sacred term, almost. A sacred term for somebody who has sacrificed a lot and done all those fun stuff, right, for somebody else without expecting anything in return. And when people are like, oh, this basketball player, LeBron James is my hero, it's like, you're gonna put that on the pedestal of, like, hero. Like, he can be a role model for somebody who plays basketball, definitely, right? But I think putting somebody that hasn't, like, made that big of a sacrifice for other people, and I mean, he might have done charitable works, sure, but, like, you know, big sacrifices that required moral courage and physical courage and all this fun stuff, and I think that's just elevating somebody higher than they need to be if they haven't done those things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so if I use the word hero for somebody who's not really a hero, I'm kind of degrading
a little. You're kind of degrading heroism, right? Because I think the same thing happened to the word love. You know, we just started, I love this, I love that, and I love you, and, like, all this, and it just kind of started to lose its meaning after a while, and we kind of lost the, like, sanctity of what it actually is. So
most of the people in the room, except with the exception maybe of your family, I probably have not had the opportunity to find out if we're heroic or not. Mm-hmm. And some of us, I hope, actually, well, selfishly, I hope a lot of us aren't put in a situation like that, honestly. So, for those of us who haven't been in that situation and may never be in that situation, how did this idea and these qualities of a hero apply to me?
Well, definitely, if you are, I think there's a two-part answer to that. So, your perceptions, right? So having these qualities of what a hero should be, that would help you to keep what actually, like, a hero is in your mind, right? So when you do come across somebody that you're like, man, that person's a hero, and I want to look up to them and, like, you know, realize, like, what was it that they're doing right that I'm doing wrong, you know, and follow kind of in their, kind of follow in their footsteps in a sense. And, I mean, you're right, you're totally right. Being in a situation in which you have to be heroic is going to be terrifying, because there's danger involved, right? There's sacrifice involved. You may not even be in imminent physical danger. There was a story of a man who, he worked for a cigarette company, and he let out a secret that they were trying to keep, and he was like, hey, they're putting stuff in there that's not supposed to be in there. And he faced, like, social slander, but that was still, like, kind of a heroic moment. He needed morality in order to make that decision, right? So I think in, like, social situations like that, you may very well be put in that. I mean, you may very well be put in a physical situation 5 minutes from now, you know, but just keeping these in mind and just knowing that this is what it takes to make a heroic action. So if you are in that situation, not saying that you're ever going to be, but if you are put in a situation like that, you can keep this in the back of your mind and act to save somebody else's life.
I'm glad you brought up that story, because I think I was asking from purely a physical, I need to save your life standpoint, mm-hmm. But there are heroes who maybe don't face physical danger.
Right.
Maybe it's social or financial or, I'm guessing in the case of that man, he lost his job.
He lost his job. He got slandered. He received threats. I mean, they were never acted upon, but he lost almost everything.
So are these characteristics biblical? Are they things that God calls us to?
I believe so. Morality, I hope I don't have to explain that one. But basically, God calls us to look at objective morality and realize what he calls to be right and wrong, and what you are to fight for what is right and stand against what is wrong. That's going to be hard, but that's what you're supposed to do. And action, faith without works is dead, right? So he kind of calls us to action in our faith, so in ministry. Competency, don't be lazy. Just like, competency is basically just like, get up and do something, just get up and have the competency to do something. We're not all competent enough to be brain surgeons, but we're all competent enough to go help somebody like pick something up and move it, right? Selflessness, greater love hath no man than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. So that like selflessness and following in Christ, I came not to be served, but to serve, right? And then courage, Joshua. The entirety of Joshua is about courage, right? And then Christ's courage in going to the cross, like, let this cup pass from me, but if not, thy will be done. So
really, whether I'm ever in a situation where I need to save someone's life or blow a whistle, I should be these things.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Leah. Well done.
Thank you, sir.
So, first thing that I kind of want to get some clarification on is, are there particular types of people who are naturally drawn to the career heroes type jobs?
I think the answer is yes, actually. So the interesting thing about Wells Crowther that I didn't get to throw in there was there's a it's called the Wells Foundation, and it's for student athletes because he played football in college. And they have his whole story up there, and they talk about how he was always a very selfless person, even as a child, which is very interesting quality for a child to have. But like even in early childhood, he was a very selfless person. But I think there are generally people who are naturally selfless. Some people do have to overcome self a lot more than other people do, right? And so I think people who are naturally very selfless, they can go into these career hero things. I think also your environment has a lot to do with it. Me being a law enforcement child, just law enforcement children in general are actually very likely to go into one of those things because they've grown up around it, right? Mm-hmm. So just kind of following like, what your parents did. But I think, yeah, there are some inclinations that people have.
In a lot of ways, your environment is what ultimately can shape whether or not you possess these qualities.
Sometimes, yes.
Okay. So, do the fell out of the sky variety of heroes, do they possess these same qualities, but they've just chosen a different path? I
think so. Very interesting. I'm bringing up a lot of stories. I'm so sorry. But there was a very interesting story that I didn't get to bring up. It was about a McDonald's worker. And he was working the drive-thru. He was standing at the drive-thru window, and this car that was supposed to stop to get their food, they just kept rolling. And he didn't know what was happening. And he hears like children inside of this car, and they're screaming, "Mom, Mom, Mom, wake up!" So their mother she was an off-duty police officer, so there's no telling what happened to her. But she collapsed as she was driving, and the car was still in drive. She had her foot off the brake, so it was still rolling. But they were headed towards the street. And so this drive-thru worker just jumps out of the window, like gets up, gets himself through that little window, jumps in the passenger seat of that car and stops the car. And then they asked him, "Why did you do that?" And he just said, "I don't know, it just happened," right? So I think those qualities definitely were there. He just hadn't fully acted upon them until that very moment, if that makes sense.
So then are those qualities more important than the training within a career hero's occupation?
So training is definitely a very important part, right? But it's kind of hard to train something that isn't there. So I think having those qualities already I mean, that's like watering a plant that's not there, right? So I think you do have to have at least an inkling of those traits there. And like, no hero has all of these 100% developed, right? So they're working on it. Like Carton, he's working the whole time to like work on his courage, right? And so I think, yeah, you have to at least have like a little seedling of it in you.
Okay. Can somebody be in one of the career hero occupations and yet not be heroic? So they have the title, they have the job, and yet they don't live up to the idea.
Yeah, I think those are the cases that you hear about, like, you know, on the news or whatever, like an officer doing something that was very not heroic, right? I think definitely somebody can go into that career with the wrong heart. And you and I talked about this a little bit. People sometimes just go into those jobs just looking for power, and that's all they want, right? And they don't have morality then, right? So they don't have that moral backbone. So, yeah, I think people can go into jobs for the wrong reasons and not possess all of those traits.
Okay. So switching gears a little bit is, let's see, plenty of villains. There are plenty of villains, I feel like, who display courage, selflessness, and competency.
Okay.
So what role does virtue play in making a hero?
You can have courage enough to go fight the good guys. You know, you can work yourself up enough to do that, and then I don't know what selfless villain you're talking about.
Thanos, right? Like he.
I knew Thanos was going to come up. Okay. Okay. So, yes, granted, Thanos did understand that he himself could possibly disappear. I think he had a very messed up morality. Yeah. Right? And he I don't know, he embodied what is the term? Is it Machiavellianism? Anyway, something like that. And justify the means. He was very much that person, right? He was literally that characteristic made into a person. But again, if you don't have that virtue, you can act on something with the wrong heart. You can hurt a lot of people. I mean, he did. Yeah. He killed so many people, right? Yeah. And in the end, like, I just kind of found myself at the end of that movie going, at what cost? Mm-hmm. Is this really better? Mm-hmm. Like, did you really attain a world that was better than the way that it was before? Mm-hmm. And so I think having that virtue and, again, acting with the right heart can lead to the best outcome.
So a lot of it has to do with the heart for it. Okay. And then one more question. So this year, you senior assisted in American history.
I did.
With Mrs. McQueen. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about is part of our history involves guys like Robert E. Lee and James Longstreet.
Right.
Right. And so I would argue that these guys displayed courage, selflessness, and competency. Mm-hmm. And so why is it that despite these qualities, many in our modern-day society would argue that they're villains?
So this is a very interesting concept that we have talked a lot about, especially when we went into the Civil War, that history is written by the victors, right? So you have the people who live to tell about it are the ones who tell about it, right? And often we do have this victory bias towards, you know, the side, because you obviously want to paint yourself as like, oh, we were the good guys, we should have won all along, right? But I think Robert E. Lee did, and Longstreet as well, they did display, I think, pretty much all of those. Because the thing that we forget about Lee is that he wasn't necessarily fighting for Jefferson Davis. He wasn't necessarily fighting for the Confederacy. He was fighting for his home, for Virginia. He was trying to protect the people that he knew and loved, and just the people who lived in his state, right? So he was going out for them to do that. So, like I said, a lot of heroes are forgotten, and I think there are definitely some heroes that have been painted as not being what they were by people who didn't really like them. So I think there are some people that, like, maybe, you know, we look at history and maybe that's not accurate. Maybe that's not who they were. And I think that Lee and Longstreet they fell on the wrong side. And so they got painted as villains. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, Leah, let's see what we can do here.
Oh, boy.
Okay, so I want to get some more clarification. Yeah, you might get some water there.
Sorry, I'm sitting on the gown and I can't move my arm very... Sorry.
Yeah, it's condensation.
Yes, I love condensation.
Chemistry. Get used to it. Okay, I want to give you an opportunity to give some more clarification, because kind of when you first sat down and you kind of talking about this feeling in your gut, from my perspective, it sounded like you said God is a feeling in your gut.
I was making more of a joke there.
Okay, well, expand on that. You know,
yeah, so that was supposed to be a joke.
Okay,
but no, I definitely think. I mean, like, who was talking about it? I think it was Abby. God just, placing certain things in your heart and certain things to act upon. And so I think that's what's happened with me, is that God, when I was like 13 or 14 years old, just kind of placed this on my heart of like, you need to go forward and you need to use the things that I'm building in you to go and do good for some people, go and basically defend those who can't defend themselves. So that's what I meant.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that said, how do we discern between our desires and God's will? Because like you have very strong desires to do this thing. How do you know that that's what God wants you to do, as opposed to my environment, kind of all these things? That's what I think I should do.
Right. So I think it's Mary that talked about desires. So what's it called? The Holy Spirit has a very interesting way of showing you things, and I have had, like, especially here recently, like some interesting interactions of like being shown things, because at first I wanted to be a nurse, die hard, I wanted to be a nurse. And then he brought a nurse into my life, and she started telling me all of these things and showing me all of these things, and I just got this very like, I think I would be miserable in that. I'm just looking at that and I'm like, that just doesn't feel right, which is such a, I don't know, sounds almost romanticist of me to say like feel, but that's the only way that I can describe it. And just talking to my dad and my grandfather and all of these other troopers that I've grown up around, just talking to them and them showing me things, it just seems like everything that they're telling me, I'm just like, that's right, that just seems right, and doors have been opened for me to go in and experience some interesting things, to just kind of see further into it. And even with this thesis, I was just, basically this thesis was just me being like, okay, am I sure this is what I'm supposed to do? Am I sure this is what I want to do? And I was looking at it, weighing the negatives, a lot of negatives that have happened here recently, with these positives of just looking at it, and I don't know, it just keeps being like that feels right, that balance feels right, even though I won't always be balanced. But.
Okay. All right, interesting. Why should I want to be a hero?
Oh, why should you want to be a hero? Yeah. Well, like I said, it begins with the very high value of life, right? So you have to love life in order to want to lose.
Right. Oh,
not want to lose yours. That was the wrong word that just came out of my mouth.
Here, let me jump in real quick.
Okay.
No, I'm saying like what's behind all of it.
Right.
No, because I understand the particulars, that you've listed of being here. But I say, why should I want any of this? Like, why is this important?
Again, as like, so I was trying to go with that.
Okay.
John 15:13, for greater love no man than this, who laid down his life for his friends. It does specifically say friends, but I think friends can be neighbors. And, the Pharisees said, who is my neighbor? And just anyone, like the Samaritan, how he acted to the Jewish man who's dying on the side of the road. That was his neighbor, right? He went and he acted on the behalf of that man. So I think it just comes from wanting to show the ultimate love of Christ to other people, right? Okay. So I think that is where it comes from. Like living, and Rachel said it so well yesterday, and I was just like, there's my thesis. I don't even have to go. But like, heroism is living fully like Christ. Like heroism kind of gets born from that. So
Right, that's what I was going to kind of ask, because like for me, you know, there's a lot of different things, and so I look at this list and I'm like, oh, those are 5 more things I need to be doing. Thanks, Leah.
You're so welcome.
Yeah, but in reality, if I'm seeking to, if God's trying to conform me into the image of Christ, then it seems like those will be things that follow naturally.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
One more question, I'll pass it back. Is, you know, it seems very much your oral is focused on the saving of physical life.
Right.
Okay, and that seems to be kind of mostly how you're defining hero.
Right.
And you mentioned a few other things, but like, how can, let's say, a 7th grader at MCA, whether a boy or girl, how can they be a hero?
Hopefully a 7th or 8th grader is not placed in one of the situations that I was talking about. But
Right.
like I said, socially, like I was talking about with the man that worked for the cigarette company, you can stand up and make heroic social actions, you know. We call, you know, like the big figures of the Bible, the heroes of the faith, right? So they stood up for their faith and they fought for their faith, even when it wasn't exactly popular to do so. So I think you can be a hero of faith and a hero of like social situations, if that makes sense. By just, you know, basically going off of your virtue and using the rest of these to fight for what's right and to fight for faith. So.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
All right, we have a couple of really good questions, I think, from the virtual audience out there. So this comes from Gabe and Addie.
Oh.
Why do you think anti-heroes are so popular in our culture right now? And how do you feel about blurring the lines between good and evil in popular movies?
Okay. I was really hoping that was going to come up wherever they are. Thank you.
My guess is they're in the student center.
Probably. So, anti-heroes are an interesting situation. So, I assume when they're talking about anti-heroes, they're talking about, like, Deadpool, Punisher, all that fun stuff. Okay. I don't think they possess morality. And the reason I get... So, we talked about a lot about this in fine arts. When you do make your hero of the story, right? You want them to be relatable, right? And I think the thing is that, like, people have stopped valuing the actual, like, you know, what the hero archetype. Which then you make your hero relatable, right? Because again, Sidney Carton was not a good person when he started. He wasn't Superman. None of us can relate to Superman. He's perfect, right? But I think the reason that Batman's a little bit more popular is because we can relate to him, but he's still a hero. You know, he's not an anti-hero. But I think, like, people are just like, oh, that's tired. We need something new and something different, and it needs to be nothing anybody's ever done before. Let's make a person who's totally terrible and have them be the hero of the narrative, you know? But I think they're just trying to express, like, different ways that somebody can, like, be heroic.
I mean, do you think it has to do with just the fact that culture as a whole is blurring the lines between good and evil?
Yeah, I think with the introduction to subjective morality, existentialism, right? So that was big on subjective morality, like your truth is not my truth, blah, 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 blah. Which is a whole other argument, many we had in apologetics. But I think with this whole, like, subjective morality, they're just like, oh, a hero doesn't actually need to possess this to be a hero. So I think it's just trying to find ways that, like, you know, you can work around that and still have a hero character. So,
Okay.
I don't know if that answers the question, but...
This next question is from Mr. Priya.
Oh, no.
Some people in the Hall of Faith were incompetent derelicts.
Right.
The people Jesus called were societal rejects.
Right.
It sounds like God is after something else beyond heroes.
Right.
What is it? Does he want heroes?
Redemption. I think it's redemption. Like, God has made some of the greatest redemption arcs on the face of the earth, which is why I really love redemption arcs. But Moses had a speech impediment, right? And Jonah was hard-headed. Peter was hot-headed. And then you had John, who, the disciple that Jesus loved, had a little bit of a pride problem, right? So we have, like... And this is something that my mom always tells me, is that God does not call the equipped, he equips the called. Right? So I think God can take any person anywhere, no matter what's wrong with you, because we all have something wrong with us, right? And he can mold us and give us the ability to do what we needed to do, because he gave Moses clarity of speech, right? And he finally broke Jonah in after sticking him in a whale for 5 days. And Jesus had to tell Peter multiple times, stop it. Just shut up, Peter, please. Stuck him in a corner until he finally learned, right? So I think, God can take somebody and can equip them to do what he needs them to do.
So I may not need to have all those qualities.
And
before the moment happens
Yeah.
where I'm called to be a hero, because God can do that in me despite myself.
Yeah, and like I said, there is no one hero besides Superman that has all of these that are completely developed, right? So, going into the situation, you might not have courage until the moment that you need to have courage, right? I'm just kind of reminded by the verse on my wrist here, perhaps this is a moment for which you have been made, And when that moment comes, like Wells Crowther, he was given everything he needed to do to go act and to save 18 people's lives. So,
this question relates to this in a way, I think. You were talking about, you think there needs to be this seedling that can be trained, or the training's meaningless. Do we all have that seedling in us?
I think potentially we could, right?
Why might we?
We're made in the image of God, right? So, I think that was the answer you were looking for there.
Well, it's what I was thinking. It wasn't necessarily the answer.
I'm just reading you here. So we are all made in the image of God, right? Which means we have the potential to do some really good things. We're fallen beings, so we kind of default to doing not so good things, right? But I think because we are made in the image of God, there is a potential that all of us may have that little, it might be like a mustard seed. But hey, faith the size of a mustard seed is great. So.
To me, that explains why maybe somebody without a lot of moral courage gains that. I think of Oscar Schindler.
Yeah.
And that's
oh
who
my
keeps
gosh.
popping into my mind.
Yeah.
Who was not a good guy.
No, he was a terrible person.
But is definitely a hero.
Yeah.
That his moment changed him.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I'm going to pass it on. Thank you.
Good movie. Good movie.
All right, Leah. So now I'm gonna take it a little bit of a different direction.
Interesting.
So in Advanced Lit this year, we had the opportunity to read Dune. Right? Okay. So putting a little bit of a spoiler out here. Oh well. But as Leah Kynes is dying,
yes,
he recalls something that his father said to him previously in regards to heroes.
Oh, yes. Oh, man, I thought that was such a very interesting thing. The worst thing that can happen to a society is for them to fall into the hands of a hero.
Yeah, right? So that's one of the things he remembers his father saying to him. And so what do you think he meant by that? So
we definitely, we talked about that a little bit, because I was just like, wait, hold on. That's not right. So we talked about that a little bit, and we were kind of talking about, kind of what begins to happen to Paul is that he's idolized, right? He's made into this religious figure, Madib. Also, spoiler alert, sorry, that was really late. So I think he was talking about, specifically somebody that the people picture to be a hero. And I think he also had a little bit of a different definition of hero than I had. But, what we talked about was that, a hero can basically, once he gets enough of a following, kind of almost like a cultish type deal, he can take the society anywhere he wants to steer it, right? And so that's what he was talking about. And we also talked about that, heroes make mistakes. They're not perfect, right? So, this hero can be leading this society or this people or their following towards something good, and he can make a mistake and lead them to detriment. So I think that's what he was talking about. And also, another very interesting thing that was brought up, and something that I really wanted to push with this thesis, is that, some people will place all of their faith in a hero and forget that they themselves can be one too. And so they think, oh, I could never be able to do this, so I have to stick with this guy because he's going to save my life if something bad happens, right? But then, or, life of somebody that I love, and forget that, wait a minute, I can save the life of somebody that I love. I can go forth and, do these things. So I think that's what he meant. So, yeah.
So it can cause people to become too dependent upon somebody else as
I think
opposed
so.
to taking action themselves.
Yeah, I think that's the excess of basically holding your heroes in the right place. It can become like anything else. It can become an idol, right? And when it becomes an idol, we kind of lose our autonomy from the idol. And so I guess just realizing, like, keeping it in a proper place, like, your heroes are people. They're people who've done good things, amazing things, but they're still people, right? Remembering that God is still God, and that you are also a person. And so, therefore, you can make that path to be, a hero as well. So, just keeping your independence is generally a good thing.
Yeah. So then, my final question for you, because I'm just curious to see what your perspective is was Paul Atreides a hero?
Okay. So, something that is definitely emphasized a couple of times by Jessica is Paul's competency. So he definitely has that, right? And then I think he also does exemplify a lot of his father's traits in selflessness. I think specifically, it was also showing his trust to Duncan, Idaho, but I think specifically his line when he was talking about, like, no, Duncan, you keep your shield. You stay protected. You're the, I trust you or whatever. So that was kind of selflessness to let him keep his shield. It takes a lot of courage to fly a helicopter into a tornado. So I'd say he has some courage. A tornado from HE double hockey sticks. So trending, yeah. So I think that does take a lot of courage. I think his morality is definitely being developed during the story of kind of what he thinks is right and wrong. So, like at the beginning of the story, he's I'm going to steal your dad's terminology. He's kind of a rosy-eyed idealist, right? He has this, like, oh, it has to be this way, but he kind of goes out into the world. He's like, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't always work, right? But I think towards the end, he does kind of become one, yeah. So
Okay. Awesome. Well, I will pass it on to Mr. Westfall. Thank you.
thank you.
All right, I'll make it quick because you've got me thinking, which is a good thing.
Oh, hey!
I know.
That is my ultimate goal in life.
First time this week I started thinking.
I'm sorry.
So I looked it up. The word hero is never mentioned in the Bible. Interesting. Yeah. And then there's only one time where the plural is used. Heroes, and it refers to these two men. I looked up the word in the Hebrew, and it really means lion of God, or these two lion-like heroes.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so what do you think about that? How does that affect kind of your thinking on heroes, that there's only this one instant in all the Bible where there's that word?
I think that one, like, okay, what is the word? Fortifies the sanctity of the word, right? It's not just thrown around, right?
Okay.
And, like, Lion of God, like, song just ran through my head. But, like, so, like, you are the Lion of God, like, I also think of, like, blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called the children of God. But I think that kind of adds significance to the word and to its use, if that makes sense. So, we talked about, like, heroism basically being the fulfillment of following the example of Christ,
Right.
Of his sacrifice on the cross. So I think that just kind of fortifies that definition.
Okay. Do you think we ever stop short? Like, in other words, do we become so fixated? You kind of mentioned about heroes can become idols, right?
Yes.
But isn't that how it's always going to be? Do we generally stop at the hero level and not move on to Christ? Or do you think... What in a hero causes us to look beyond the person themselves and on to Christ?
So, like I said, like, heroism is, following the example of Christ. So I think if heroism, if it is pulled off the correct way, it's just kind of this, like, reflection, like, we'll say, like, Christ is like the sun, right? So bright, can't even look at it, right? Just, it was such an immense act that we can't even begin to fathom it. But I think, like, heroes, if they do it correctly, they become mirrors. And so they reflect a little bit of that light.
Okay.
And when you see that light, you're like, oh, I know where that comes from. And that's kind of like a little, just itty bitty little chunk of it that I can grasp and understand. And man, if that person could do that, how much more has Christ done for me?
Okay.
You know, so I think that's where that.
That's
comes in.
excellent. I think that's an excellent illustration. Okay, I'm gonna throw one last hand grenade. Okay, so if God allows us to die, or it could be argued a lot of time causes our death,
Okay.
is God not a hero?
Interesting terminology that you should use there, because you once again bring up the problem of evil. So sin and death are this, right? Sin, death came into the world because of sin. Just pull it along, right?
Okay.
So I actually don't think God has anything to do with death, right? Because like he is wholly good. There is no evil in him, right? And death is a side effect of evil. So while yes, he can allow things to happen, and that's a whole other thing.
You're opening up a
It's
door
a whole
wide
other
for
thing.
me. This,
I know. Yeah. Okay.
You're
so I'm
lucky that we're running out of time.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, God can definitely allow us to die. He does, right? And we all have an appointed time, and that's when we're going to be allowed to do so.
Right.
But
Here, I want to jump in because I
Okay.
want to have a quick counterpoint. So he kills Moses.
right,
Right? So
Well-
God doesn't just allow the death of Moses because it says Moses didn't need glasses, he was in perfect health, but God kills him because
Yeah.
he's not going to the promised land.
right.
So,
Okay, so that brings another thing of like we all have a purpose in life. We all have a plan, right? That God has set before us. Again, I don't know who that was, but they talked about it, right? And God has this plan set out for our life. And I think once we fulfill the plan that God has fulfilled for us, we're no longer needed here, and we're taken up into, into Christ. And He's just like, okay, you've done exactly what I needed you to do in my plan, and we'll take you up. Right? So I think that is what happened with Moses. He did what he needed to do, and he was no longer needed, right? Because God doesn't just do things that are useless. So he puts you on this earth for a use, and you're never actually useless because you're taken up after your use is done. So
all
I
right.
think, yeah.
All right, you redeemed that one. All right. It's time for you to ask a question.
Okay, I left my sticky note on my podium. Can I grab that? I'm going to grab that really quickly. Sorry about that. I'm organized. Okay, so I have individual questions. And Nelson, I would like to start with you. So one thing that really, you're just the first one on the sticky note. So something that I really like to ask people, and I just kind of like to get an insight, is who are your heroes and why? Because I think that can tell you a lot about a person.
You know what? I actually anticipated this question.
I knew you did.
And I wrote down my list of 5 on my paper.
Oh, we got 5.
So, yeah.
Okay.
All right. So, some of these you might consider, based on your definition, to be a little bit more of role models as
Okay.
opposed to heroes.
Okay.
But I think at the top of the list, as it should be, is my dad.
Okay.
And I would just say, looking at a lot of those things, I think he, throughout his life, even though he's never necessarily done anything that people might say was heroic, I think he's exemplified all of those traits in his life. I would
Right.
argue particularly selflessness.
Okay.
Just, myself knowing everything that he gave up for me. So first on the list is my dad. And then next on the list, this one was an easy one, was Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain.
Oh.
He's always been one of my favorites. And actually, when I was a student here, I did my senior thesis about
Right.
him. Right. And so I
You
just
have a
think,
mug in your
I
office.
think he kind of ends up being one of those fell out of the sky heroes because prior to purchasing a commission in the Union Army, he's a rhetoric teacher at Bowdoin College.
Yeah.
And so furthest thing away from actually serving in the military, and yet he goes and does this when it's needed. Then after him is actually Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Oh, yeah.
And so, we've discussed him.
Okay.
And then I think after him would be Elijah. So Elijah is one of my favorite characters people in the Bible, and I think he does a really good job of exemplifying a lot of courage. Even though a lot of times, as you watch him, he doesn't seem like he's very courageous in how he responds to different things. And yet he ends up doing what's right in spite of himself. And then the last one on the list is C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis, this is the one where I think it maybe falls a little bit more into that role model. But yeah.
Okay, cool. Mr. Westfall, you're next on the list. Of everything you read, because you are a book person, such as myself.
Is that a nice way of saying I'm a nerd?
I think nerd's a compliment. I think nerd's a compliment.
That's what I tell myself at night. Nerd is a compliment.
Yes. So, I mean, that's what I tell myself too, and I sleep very well at night. So, out of everything that you've read, which hero of literature do you think influenced you the most?
Oh gosh,
That's a really hard question.
It's a hard question. I mean, yeah,
Jesus.
yeah.
That's a good one. Jesus.
I'm gonna go fictional. You
Okay,
know,
we're gonna go fictional.
because I was like, get after Leah. She's making fun of fictional characters. You know, because fictional characters, you know, are a lot to me. It'd have to be Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
You know, and then I'm gonna kind of use a few in there. All right. The one I would most want to be is Aragorn.
Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
because he's my favorite fictional hero of all time. Just
flowing hair.
Yes, majestic. Yeah, everything that I would want to be,
Right.
is there in him.
Yeah.
Okay, but then Frodo, even though he falters at the very end, just his consistency,
Right.
You know, through everything, and his willing to like leave everybody behind to be able to keep going, and then
Right.
Sam. Like
Oh,
Sam, you know, so really those three are kind of the holy fictional trinity, you know, for me, of Aragorn, Frodo.
Before
and
you get
Sam.
struck down.
No, the Lord knows who I am. Don't worry about that. So he knows I'm like this. So Sam, because of his selflessness, right? And then, but you really think about it, couldn't have been completed without all three of them,
Right,
All
yeah.
three are needed. So I think it's also a great reminder that a hero doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
And I think in all of that, kind of Boromir is the anti-hero.
Yeah.
He wants to be a hero so much, right? But then he gets redeemed, you know, in that whole scene. So there's so much about true heroism in there, and I think it's never about one person.
Right.
Because none of them can do it about themselves. And so I think that's the danger of hero worship, is you kind of focus, this one person.
Yeah.
And that dilutes the true picture.
Right.
So.
Okay, Miss McQueen. After all of our conversations about heroes, and I've heard you mention this a couple of times, how have your perceptions of your heroes changed?
I have one question I have to ask you before I answer that.
Okay.
If you pull me over someday, are you going to give me a ticket?
That really depends upon the grade that you were about to give me. So
That's fair.
I believe in justice, ma'am. So if you are doing something wrong, I could ask that question all the
Some
time.
of my questions for you that we didn't get into is like, I mean, other than Christ, which is the very churchy answer, like, have I had a need in my life for a hero, especially in the physical sense? Mm-hmm. And so I kind of question all of that now.
Yeah.
I think I for sure have role models that like have shaped me and influenced me, and I would have previously said in a way they're my hero, and maybe in some way they still are, but I think through all of our discussions I've kind of questioned whether that's really the right word for them or not.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Sweet. Yay.
all right.
I guess so.
All right, if you'll bow your heads and pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for Leah. I thank you for what you've placed on her heart to share with us. I thank you for just who she is, and I thank you for the excitement and passion for which she just goes through life, and I thank you for the things that she is passionate about. And thank you that we get to come here today and just celebrate her and listen to the things that she has to say. And I just pray that you'll have your hand of protection on her as she graduates from MCA and continues to move on to other things. And I just pray that she will honor and glorify you in everything that she does. In Christ's name I pray and ask it. Amen.